to another video from the Aspiring Medics. If you're new here, my name is Arisma and I'm now a third year medical student at King's College London. In this video, we're going to be taking you through the abstract reasoning section of the UCAT exam, and we're going to be walking you through all the different types of questions that you may come across in this section. But before we begin, make sure to check out our channel because we post weekly videos to help you ace your med school application. If that sounds interesting, make sure to like, share and subscribe. So first, let's have a quick overview of the abstract reasoning section. So what is this section all about? It assesses your ability to identify patterns amongst abstract shapes, so identifying both similarities and differences. This section lasts 12 minutes and you have to answer 50 questions in this time, and this has been updated for the 2022 exam. What kind of skills does this section test you on? First of all, it tests your ability to change track, to critically evaluate information, especially visual information, to generate hypotheses, so generate hypotheses about what the pattern is, what the similarities are, what the differences are, and so on, and to query judgments. It also assesses your ability to use both convergent and divergent thinking to infer relationships from visual information. So that is identifying both similarities and differences between objects. And lastly, it also assesses your ability to identify irrelevant and distracting information, which could possibly lead to incorrect conclusions. Next, let's look at the types of questions. So there are 4 types of questions in this section. The first one is where you have objects in set A and objects in set B, and you are allocated 5 test shapes and you need to decide whether they belong to set A, set B, or neither. Type 2 is where you have to complete the series, so you're given 4 objects or 4 shapes and you have to predict what the next shape in the series will be. Type 3 is where you complete the statement, so one shape is similar to the other shape in a particular way, and then you need to see what the third shape is similar to out of 4 options. And the 4th type of question is again where you have shapes in set A and set B, and which of the following belongs to set A, set B, or neither. Pattern triggers is something really important in this section. So as I mentioned before, in this section you're presented with visual information, sets of shapes where there is some sort of pattern and you need to be able to identify that pattern. So an easy way to do that is to remember this mnemonic SPUNKS. So using this mnemonic, you can go through a checklist of all the different possible patterns and come up with a final answer as to what the pattern is and to identify both similarities and differences. So what does SPUNKS stand for? First off, it's shape. So is the shape curved or straight, for example? Second, we have position. Where is the shape? So for example, in this box, the triangle is always in the bottom left corner. O stands for orientation, so which side does an arrow point to, for example, what side does the triangle point to, etc. N stands for number, so an even or odd number of shapes, or even literally there are 3 triangles in every single box in set A, for example. C stands for color, so white, black and grey are usually the 3 colors that you'll come across in the abstract reasoning section. And the last S stands for size. So for example, in this box, you can see a large shape is always on the top of a smaller shape, and that could be the possible rule in a set. Whereas in set B, the rule would have been a small shape on top of a large shape. So let's look at a sample question from type 1. So you're given objects in set A and set B, and you need to identify a pattern. So this is our question. I would recommend you to pause the video now and try to identify a pattern amongst all the set A shapes and a pattern amongst all the set B shapes, and then continue this video. So pause the video now if you need to. Now, at first glance, looking at these shapes, I can see that there are diamonds in both sets, and each diamond has a circle next to it. This circle can be white or it can be black. Sometimes the circles are attached, sometimes the circles are just kind of floating around, and those are my initial thoughts. Have these initial thoughts, they're really, really useful, and then kind of have a more deeper dive into what the exact rule is. So let's look at what the rule for this question was. In set A, there are 5 squares or diamonds in a diagonal orientation. If there's a black circle to the right of a square, then the next square will be rotated by 90 degrees clockwise. So you can see that all of these circles are to the right of the diamond, and then after the black circle is here, it's rotated and the circle is now at the bottom. And if you see that in any of these squares, the same rule applies. So the easiest way to identify this rule is to look at the simplest box. try to identify what the rule is, compare boxes between set A and set B and see what the difference is. And once you think of a rule, check it with another box in the same set to make sure that that rule actually applies to every single box in that set. Now in set B, if you come across a black circle, the next square will rotate by 90 degrees but anti-clockwise. And again, you can see that happen in all of these squares. So those are the rules that we've come across. It's a very good idea to first come up with the rule or the pattern and then look at the questions. Otherwise, you're bound to just find a pattern that applies to one question and you'll form your own biases, and that's not going to help you get to the correct answer. And you're more likely to get distracted by irrelevant information if you look at what the question's asking you instead of just looking at the sets and trying to identify a pattern first. So the first test shape that we have is this one, and we need to decide what set it's in. So I can see that there's a black circle here and the square has been rotated and it's done so in a clockwise manner. And then there's another square and it's rotated again in a clockwise manner. So the answer to this is set A. Now the next question is, I can see that there's a black circle and the square has been rotated, but this time it's done so anti-clockwise, so it belongs to set B. So the third question, I can see a black circle and I can see that the square has again been rotated, but this time clockwise, and it's happened again here, so this belongs to set A. Our fourth question, I can see a black circle and the shape has rotated clockwise. I can see another black circle, it's rotated by 90 degrees in the clockwise direction again. So again, this belongs to set A. So the last question is where we encounter this black circle and the square rotates clockwise by 90 degrees. But then we encounter this next black circle and it doesn't rotate at all. So the answer to this is neither. Now you can see that although in the beginning of the section, when you see that there are 50 questions in this section and you only have 12 minutes to complete it, it may seem very overwhelming. But once you identify a pattern, it's really easy to go through these questions in a couple of minutes really. So it's not as overwhelming as it may seem. Moving on to our type 2 question. So this is when you have to complete the series. So this is our question. Again, pause the video if you need to and try to figure out the answer to this question. So at first glance, I can see that the shape has been rotated clockwise in some ways, but I don't know what the specifics of that are. So once you look at it more specifically, you can see that the entire pattern within the box turns 90 degrees clockwise in each subsequent box. The colors of the circles stay the same, but the squares alternate between black and white in each subsequent box. So you can see that here throughout the pattern. So everything's rotated by 90 degrees clockwise, circles stay the same color, but the squares alternate their color each time. And now we have to pick which figure completes the series. So first we need to look at which of these shapes is rotated clockwise, and that's all of them. And then you need to look at the color of the circles and the color of the squares. And once you do that, you will figure out that C is the correct answer. Another question in complete the series. This is your pattern. Again, pause the video if you need to. Now, at first glance, I can see that there's lots of arrows in these images. In the first image, 2 arrows are colored black. In the next, there's 3. Then we're back to 2, and then we're back to 3. So maybe this has something to do with it. Once I look at it more carefully, I can see what the rule is. So there are 2 groups of arrows. Group 1 are the 6 arrows on either side, and group 2 are the 2 arrows in the middle. In group 1, the black arrow moves 2 spaces clockwise every single time. And in group 2, first the white arrow is on top, then both the arrows turn black, then the black arrow is on top, and then both the arrows turn black, and then ideally the bottom arrow should be black. So keeping that in mind, let's see which figure completes the series. Now we know that both the middle arrows are black in this figure, in the last square, so that means that the bottom arrow must be black in this square. So that leaves us with either option A or option D. And then we look at the arrows on the side, so the group 1 arrows, and they need to move by 2 spaces clockwise, and that is answer choice A. Next, let's look at type 3 questions where you have one box is to this, as is the third box to one of the answer choices. It's a bit hard to explain, but once we do some practice questions, it will definitely make more sense. So this is a sample question. Again, pause the video if you need to and try to figure out the pattern on your own, and then we can go through the answer choices. So again, at first glance, I can see that there's 2 shapes in the middle, there's 3 arrows around it, and the second shape now has 3 shapes in the middle. And again, there are 3 arrows, but they're in different orientations. So when we look more closely, we figure out that the rule is the arrows in the box face the opposite direction. So in the second box, each arrow faces the opposite direction as compared to the first box. The smallest shape in the left box, which is a triangle, then becomes the biggest shape in the right box and also the outermost shape. The biggest shape in the left box, which is the square in this case, then becomes smaller and is in the middle of the box to the right. And finally, the box which was in the middle on the left box again stays on the inside but flips and changes color. So those are all the rules that we've come across. So keeping all these rules in mind, let's think about what happens to this third shape at the bottom. So first of all, each of the arrows need to change their direction. So if something's pointing downwards, it needs to now point up, and vice versa. We also know that the outermost shape, which is a circle, will now go inside. So we have a circle in the middle here. The innermost shape will go outside and become the biggest shape, but it also stays on the inside, but it's flipped and it is a different color. And the only answer choice that satisfies all of those conditions is answer choice B. Here is another sample question, and again, pause if you need to. So again, this has to do with shapes and their sizes. So on the left, I can see that there is a circular ring on the outside, which is darkened. I then have a white box, and then I have 3 circles on the inside, one of which is black. On the right side, that circular ring has now moved inside and it has switched color, so it's white. The square is outside of that, so the middle shape stays in that position. And then the 3 circles move right at the edge of the box, but they have been rotated because in the left shape, the black circle is at the top, but on the right shape, the black circle is towards the left. So it's rotated by 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So let's apply those same rules to the next shape and look at what the answer choice might be. So this is the rule. There are 2 larger shapes, an outer shape and an inner shape, and there's 3 smaller shapes inside the inner shape. The 3 smaller shapes move out and they move 1 place anti-clockwise. The outer shape changes color and moves inside the inner shape. So that's the rule. Let's apply that now. These are all of our answer choices. So we need the outermost shape to go right on the inside and switch color. So we need a square in the middle that is black. Outside that square in the middle that is black, we need another square that is just plain white. And then we need the 3 triangles to be outside and they need to be switched 1 place anti-clockwise. So the black triangle needs to be on the top right. So the only answer choice that satisfies all of this is answer choice C. So lastly, moving on to the last type of question, which is again a set A and set B type question, but you need to decide which belongs in which set. So this is the question. Again, pause if you need to and try to figure out what the pattern in set A is and how does that differ from the pattern in set B. So like I mentioned before, it's a really good strategy to find the simplest box in both sets and then compare them. In set A and set B, we start from a black square. A line to a white circle will split into 2, a white shape and a dark shape. A line to a shaded circle goes through to a single line which is followed by a white shape or dark shape, and the ends of the connected patterns are always squares. And in set B, again, you start with a black square, and then there's a line to a shaded circle which will split into 2. Again, a white shape and a dark shape. A line to a white circle will go through to a single line and then it'll be followed by either a white shape or a dark shape, and again the ends are always squares. So those are all of the rules that we've come across, and keeping that in mind, we need to decide which of these 4 answer choices belongs to set A. So in set A, the grey circles will lead to either a white or dark shape. It'll never split up, and answer choice A is the only one in which that happens. Let's move on to the next question. Which of the following test shapes belongs in set B? In set B, the grey circles always splits up into 2. The white circle stays in 1 line. And again, the only answer choice where the white circle does not split into 2 is answer choice A. Looking at the third question, which belongs to set A, again, let's keep that in mind that the white circle needs to split up into 2. And the only answer that follows that is answer choice D. The fourth question in this set, we're looking at which of these will belong to set B. So we need to look for a grey circle that splits into 2. So that happens both in B and in D. Now, it's not answer choice number D because remember, in both sets, the last shape is always a square. But in answer choice number D, the shape to the right is a circle. But in answer choice B, everything makes sense because the grey circle is followed by white circles which just end in a straight line, and the last and final shape is a square. So the answer is B. And the final question in this set is again about set B. So again, we're looking at a grey circle that splits into 2 or a white circle that follows a straight line, and the only answer choice that follows all of that is answer choice A. So that brings us to the end of the video, and just before we ended, I wanted to summarize some of our top tips. So firstly is to identify similarities. Sometimes if you identify similarities between set A and set B, you'll know that that's not something that could be in the pattern. So you can look at other properties of the shapes and try to figure out what the difference is. So identifying similarities actually might help you identify differences. My next tip is to start with the simplest box. As I've been saying throughout the video, the simplest box will always have the least number of distractors, and therefore you're more likely to find the pattern easily. My third tip is to learn from your mistakes. I personally was quite bad at the abstract reasoning section, but what I did was made a list of all the mistakes I made, all of the patterns that I came across, and then had a look through all of these patterns the day before my exam, and that really stimulated my brain to think in a way to identify these patterns, to identify similarities and differences, and to look at what the UCAT expected from me. Also, the UCAT often repeats patterns, so it's a good idea to make a list of these patterns, as something that you've come across before might come up in your final exam. My fourth tip is to identify a pattern first. If you look at the answer choices first, you're more likely to be biased and you're more likely to find a wrong answer. So look at the question first, try to identify a pattern, and then look at the answer choices. My fifth tip is to use mnemonics like sponks. If you go through each of the letters in sponks, you'll easily find a pattern because you'll come across all of the most common properties that the UCAT changes in their shapes in the abstract reasoning section. And my final tip is to take a step back. So like I've been saying throughout this video, it's a great idea to first just quickly have a broader picture of what's going on in both the sets, and then do a deep dive and identify specific patterns and rules. If you're really struggling in a question, that might be because you're looking at things too narrowly. It might be useful to take a step back, look at the bigger picture, try to identify obvious similarities and differences first, and then go in and do a deep dive. So those are all my tips for today. So just before the video ends, if you did enjoy it, make sure to like, share and subscribe, and comment down below what you would like to see next.